Supreme Family Chaos. Creator Eliza Phoenix. Chapter 17 Stealing Him Away. Summary. Tony notices something about Steven's behavior when Peter spends time with the team. If Tony was actually thinking about it, it started with Thor. And really, someone had to be looking to see it. The first time the god of thunder visited the tower years after Ultron, he had Peter's full attention. The spiderling followed him around with eyes full of adoration and asked him so many questions. Tony was afraid he would succeed in annoying the god. Except Thor was surprisingly patient with Peter and seeming to enjoy his attention. It only earned an eye twitch, though. Then Peter was hanging out with Scott, Clint, and Sam. Whether it was talking over the family living room and playing video games for hours on end, or actually going out and tossing football around as obnoxiously as they possibly could. Tony was convinced that Clint threw the football at one of the windows on purpose, just to get a rise out of the genius. Sometimes Peter would sneak behind Sam, and Scott was nearby and smack the back of his head, then practically phase out of existence before he turned around. That always started a wrestling match between the Falcon and Ant-Man, while Hawkeye and Spider-Man watched from the sidelines. All that earned was a grumble. Then things started to get more obvious when the teens spent time with Steve, Natasha, and Bucky. Granted, their hanging out was usually training, but occasionally, if Peter was miraculously feeling calm, he would sit with Steve and watch the captain sketch. He would help Bucky bake if the soldier found himself in the kitchen, or he would lay his head on Natasha's lap and they would quietly read their separate books. That got a glare. That was when Tony realized Stephen Strange was jealous and addicted to cuddling with Peter. The cub was straying from the den, and Mama Bear was not having it. He was sure in Stephen's mind the only person he would share Spider Baby with was Tony himself, and actually Rhodey on occasion, and that the Avenger was overstepping their bounds. Stark didn't know if that was endearing or worrying. When Peter hung out with Wanda and Vision, Stephen bristled. The Scarlet Witch would show the teen her powers whenever he asked, and Strange would be on the edge. Those times didn't last long because Levi would suddenly drag a very surprised Peter away until he was safe within arms of reach of one of his parents. Tony didn't totally blame him. While he trusted Wanda, she still made him a little nervous after the whole screwing with his mind thing. She did apologize for it, and the engineer accepted and forgiven her, but the memory was still there. Stephen was otherwise calm about Peter's time with the Avengers. They were a team, after all, and it was important they built a friendship and trust. Then Loki came, and that was the last straw that broke Stephen's back. Stephen stepped into Mama Bear mode the moment Thor came into the tower with the God of Mischief. And Tony knew that if Loki so much as touched Peter, there would be hell to pay. It wasn't even noon. Tony needed a drink. Man of iron, I brought my brother. Peter looks up so quickly that the others were afraid he gave himself whiplash. Loki? Tony and Stephen's tense as the boy abandons his homework at the kitchen table and bounds right towards the trickster. Loki stares with disinterest as Peter looks up at him curiously, and the expression wavers just a bit at the teen's next word. Can you shapeshift? What? Tony almost laughs at the confusion expression on Loki's face, but instead leans towards Stephen. Calm down. The Peter effect is working, and I don't want another power outage. How can you be so calm? Stephen hisses. Because, Stephanie, I trust Point Break. If he's bringing the god of mischief here, then he believes that he can be trusted. Stephen growls in response, and Tony grins. Have I mentioned how attractive you are when Mama Bear comes out to play? Stephen rubs his face. I can't believe you. Look, be protective. I don't care. Just put it on a back burner. If Loki tries something, then you can protect your cub. She's right. It's cute. And to be clear, everyone but you and Peter are calling him that. You two need to get with the program. What program? There is no program, says the guy that responds to Mama Bear. I thought denial was the river of Egypt. Stephen steals Tony's mug and he pours himself some coffee, ignores the man's protest as he walks into the kitchen table and sits in Peter's abandoned seat. He lazily glances at the teens' physics homework while also keeping an eye on Set Cup and their new visitor. By some miracle, Peter had convinced the god to play chess, and Loki seemed to enjoy himself. The Peter effect was in full swing. Even the god of mischief couldn't resist the teen. Loki looks up from his play. Will he stop glaring at me all day? Peter looks up, then follows his gaze to find Stephen giving the shapeshifter the stink eye. Mom! Loki watches with interest when Stephen's glare immediately softens to something fond when he returns his attention to Peter. Yes, Spiraling? You're being annoyingly overprotective. Loki and Tony notice the shattering effect Peter's words have on the sorcerer, but the teen completely misses it. You're worse than Dad and his baby protocols. Peter turns back to the chess game, completely unaware of the heartbreak he just caused Tony, and Tony watches as Stephen calmly stands up from his seat. The doctor's face was completely devoid of emotion as he left the full mug of coffee on the table with Peter's homework and left the kitchen appearing to be unaffected. It was an outright lie. Tony opens his mouth, but Loki holds up one finger to stop him. The engineer closes his jaw with a snap, not necessarily to obey the god, but because he was curious. He obviously saw the effect Peter had on Stephen and had something to say about it. He would humor Loki for now. You call him your mother? Loki asks the teen quietly. Peter blushes. Yeah, it was an accident at first, but he didn't seem to mind, and then it turned into a running joke. But he is important to you? Peter studies the board after Loki moves one of his pawns. Of course, Mr. Stark and Doctor Strange are really all I have. They took me in when my last remaining relative died. Loki hums as if in thought. So you're thanking him? So your way of thanking them is telling your mother that he's being overprotective and annoying? Peter freezes, and doe-like eyes flash up to meet green. He has a good reason to be worried. But you're being nice, and he was being careful. Peter looks down into his lap and fiddles with the hem of his shirt. Do you think he hates me now? Tony groans and rubs his forehead. The kid had serious parental insecurity. Stephen will never hate you, but I'm pretty sure if you massacred half of Manhattan, he would help you hide the bodies. Peter's eyes widen as he looks up at his father. That's a little terrifying. He also sat back while you spent time with the rest of the team and made friends with the psychotic god. Tony smirks when Loki rolls his eyes. Mama Bear has been waiting to cuddle his cub. Peter wrinkles his nose at the term, but looks back at Loki. Can we finish our game later? Of course, family is important. Peter nods and runs off to find Stephen, and Tony raises an eyebrow at the god, studying his board game. He never thought Loki would be the type to take a page out of a parenting book and kindly reprimand a teenager. If it were a couple of years ago, it would have sent him into a loop. But it wasn't. It was really like any other Saturday afternoon. That was a kind of depressing thought. Weird was a regular part of his life now. Thank you. I don't think Peter meant it. Tony sighs. No, he didn't. Peter found Stephen sitting in his parents' room, and at first thought the man was meditating until quietly called for him, and got no response. That only meant he was in astral form, and he was off somewhere or another, probably as far from Peter as he could. I'm sorry. Peter sits on the ground in front of the projecting sorcerer and slowly lays his head on one of his crossed knees. I didn't mean what I said. He laid there with no sign of response from the elder for over an hour, with only his mind to keep him company. His thoughts quickly railed, I hope he forgives me. Dad was wrong, Stephen hates me, and probably knows I'm here and is waiting for me to leave. Please don't hate me, Peter whispers. The boy startles when a hand gently brushes his hair, followed by a fond huff. Never, Spiderling. Peter sits up and stares at the blue eyes before throwing his arms around Stephen's neck. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it. I forgive you on one condition. Anything. I get my cub time. Peter laughs and Stephen resists the urge to smack his own face. Shit, he said it out loud.